I'm Emma Barker Bonomo, Senior Editor at Time, and I'm joined today by Mellody Hobson, the co-CEO and President of Ariel Investments. Welcome to TIME100 Talks, Mellody.
Thanks for having me.
So during the second quarter of this year, the U.S. economy experienced the worst contraction on record, tens of millions of Americans filing for unemployment. What actions can business leaders and policymakers take to stabilize our economy and get people back to work?
Well, there's no question this has been a time for the record books, really like something we've never seen before, including when you include the Great Depression. But what I would say is I think many of us see it as a moment as opposed to a long period of time. And the way to keep this moment contained is for our political leaders to act. We're all waiting with bated breath for another round of stimulus and another round of support for the American people. It is essential. We need to keep money in the hands of everyday Americans so that they can buy food and have shelter and make sure that they can take care of their families. Otherwise, we really, truly are looking at long-term damage to the economy. And while I know it's tough for many of the landlords, some of the moratoriums that are out there on evictions and things like that, that will help to keep people in homes, which is really needed right now during a pandemic, so that this doesn't continue to grow and escalate. You put them in shelters, etc. It becomes a vicious circle.
What does our economic future look like if we don't take those measures?
I think smart people will do the right thing. And I don't think that will happen. I think that's a nuclear option. And I just think that I cannot see that. It's a question of how much stimulus there will be. There's a difference of opinion, somewhat more, somewhat less. In my mind, continuing what we had made more sense or makes more sense. Now, there are people out there who say, well, for someone who was making minimum wage, they're making more right now than they made as a minimum wage worker. In a pandemic, I'm okay with putting a little extra money in the hands of lower income Americans. I think it's really, really necessary. I also think it gives the American citizen some sense of confidence in this government and the economy. And confidence is the name of the game when it comes to the economy. You want that consumer confidence not to fall off a cliff, because the consumer is so important to the gross domestic product in this country.
There's been a lot of talk about childcare and, people, especially women, not being able to go back to work even if their works do reopen because there's no one to look after the kids. What do you think should be done there?
That's going to be a tough one. I mean, and I totally understand. I have a 7-year-old, and so I know firsthand the choices that you have to make in that regard. When we are not in school, which has its own dangers, especially in areas where the virus has not been contained to the extent that it can be, and the metrics are not as positive as we would all want them to be. The danger of going to school is real. At the same time, staying home just has profound implications for the economy, because if you can't send your kids to school, you can't work. And so really working through that issue is going to be very, very important. In the conversations I've had with some civic leaders and with some government leaders, they are clearly trying to get their arms around this. But this is not going to be a situation where there are any quick fixes, because we're talking about tens of millions of kids. And this one is hard. I wish I had a snappy answer for you, but I don't. There's the idea of creating some pods that are smaller for some of these students, especially of families that where the mom or dad really have to go to work, and they have to be outside of the home, and they can't leave the children at home. And I know there are some government programs trying to look at that, but the issue becomes that you have to have people who are vetted and who have passed security tests, et cetera, taking care of those children and getting all of that into place in literally weeks. That's a tall order.
Yeah. You've been an advocate on issues like increased financial literacy and empowerment. Just on a personal level, a lot of Americans are struggling right now. Is there anything people should be doing for their personal finance as they navigate this moment, even not knowing if they're going to get another stimulus check?
Yes, the number one thing I would be doing is advocate for yourself. Literally pick up the phone. A lot of times in these situations, bills pile up and you think to yourself, I don't even want to look at it. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm just going to pretend it doesn't exist. That is the worst course of action. Picking up the phone, calling that vendor, calling that credit card company, calling your bank, your mortgage company, etc., explaining that you need forbearance during this period. I promise you, they're used to that call at this point. And if you've been a good paying customer, they're going to try to give you as much leeway as they possibly can. I would be pushing very, very hard so you don't do long-term damage to your credit report, which is that's something that is lasting and takes a long, long time to fix. So picking up the phone and advocating, explaining that you can't pay, it'll be understood why you can't, and then trying to come up with a plan B, a plan C, etc. These institutions are ready for those calls, so make it. If you don't make it, if you don't ask, you can't get the relief that you need. You know, I heard a quote the other day from a woman that I really respect: a closed mouth does not get fed. So you've got to go and ask and advocate for yourself.
Do you think companies are being forgiving with that right now?
I think companies are being very realistic. And so from the sense that I've had of the businesses that I've had exposure to, they're trying to do the best that they can for their customers. And so again, I think this is a time to really lean into saying that you need that forbearance. For a lot of people, it's just really hard to do that. There's a pride issue or just a feeling of shame. I just think you've got to get that out of your mind. If that's how you feel, try your best to overcome them, overcome those issues, because there's just so much at stake right now.
Are there long-term investments or programs that could be implemented to better prepare our communities for future economic crises?
I wouldn't say government programs, but I've been a big believer in saving for a rainy day. And I've advocated that for years and years. And America, it's so interesting. We've gotten this backwards. We start saving when times get really bad. We start pulling in our horns, and we spend when times are really good. And that's just not how it's supposed to work. And so really saving and putting that money aside for living expenses that will take you through 3, 6 months, 9 months, you know, in a great situation a year. I think we all see this more clearly than ever before, the importance of having that rainy day fund. You know, obviously some people have had to lean on their retirement money during this period. Maybe it was borrowing from your 401k plan or the like. Again, that is normally sacred money to me, but we're in the most overused word of the day, unprecedented times. So I understand the need to lean on those assets to carry yourself through. But the main thing to me is this is not going to be a problem that is solved by others. Personal accountability will be everything, and even small amounts saved over long periods of time will make a difference. Right now, I know that is not possible for most people, so please don't think I'm advocating for it at this moment, but I really do hope that when we get beyond this period, that these memories stay with us, much in the same way of the Depression babies. The Depression babies were some of the best savers in American history because they had gone through that really, really tough time. If we can internalize what this period feels like and have it make us smarter about the future, it will be a horrible experience that will ultimately pay dividends later.
Savings is one area, especially where there's huge economic inequality in the United States. Racially, white people just have more generational wealth. As we rebuild from this crisis, is it possible to leverage this moment to shape our economy to be more equitable?
Well, I think it starts at the corporate level. You know, I think corporations have a lot more responsibility than ever before. I think we all recognize government is not going to save the day. Our government is challenged. And so because of that, I think CEOs are now in the hot seat, whether they like it or not. There are a lot of societal issues that are now just been laid at their feet, and they have to help figure out. And I do think corporate America is realizing that the economic inequality that exists in this country, they have some responsibility for where we are as a nation. And the conversations that are occurring right now in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, I think are major. I think they are as significant as what we saw during the civil rights era of sit-ins, large counter sit-ins, and the signing of the Civil Rights Act. I think right now, this is civil rights in corporate America. That's what's happening. And I think to the extent corporate America looks at what we call the 3 Ps, people, purchasing, and philanthropy, and make sure that they're being equitable, I think we could change the game. We talk about the fact at the people level, you want to count. I love the saying, math has no opinion. In corporate America, if it matters, we count it. And so making sure you look at everything from the top of the organization, the board of directors, to the C-suite executives, the senior leaders, all the way throughout the organization, counting and looking at how does my organization look from a racial and ethnic standpoint? And how does it look when I compare it to the country? And those shortcomings should be addressed. And they can be addressed with more diverse slates when you're looking to hire people inside of the company, where you need more than one diverse person on the slate. The data shows you need 2 or more. And then looking at purchasing. I think the word procurement or minority purchasing is last century. None of us goes and procures a lawyer or an investment banker. When you look at the growth areas of our economy, it's professional services, financial services, and technology. And so I would ask companies to think about business diversity. Who do you do business with? With whom do you do business? Are those diverse organizations as well? And you again count, look at all areas of corporate spend and say, do I have diverse suppliers in all areas of spend, from legal to accounting to investment management to technology, whatever it might be, to consulting and the like. And to the extent that that happens, you're helping to grow minority businesses, which is so important to this country. And it then, again, addresses some of the economic inequality that we have. Because a lot of the civil unrest we have in this country right now is about economic inequality. And then last but not least, philanthropy. My fear right now is philanthropy is the tail that's wagging the dog. There's a lot of virtue signaling going on right now with people trying to say, I'm with you, and they're writing checks. Well, that's great, but it doesn't work unless you fix your own house. Change starts from within. And so I hope that the philanthropy, which is appreciated, continues, but that it becomes very understood by these leaders that will not do the job. It's the people in your own organization. Are you diverse and inclusive? And do you do business with a diverse group of people when you spend your money? That can change our society and move the needle in a significant way.
Right. So 2 of those kind of pillars are, involve hiring and philanthropy. Those both involve companies spending money, and we're in the middle of a big recession. How do you square those 2 societal issues?
Well, certainly we've seen a lot of companies make commitments to diversity in terms of philanthropy to diverse organizations. We've had companies make commitments to doing business with communities of color. So that's happened. They are spending the money right now. There's no question, you're right, about the layoffs that have occurred throughout our society. They're massive. We see them every day. We've never seen numbers like this before. At some point, that will reverse itself. And in that reversal, can they be intentional about those jobs as they fill them and be thoughtful about making sure that representation is tracking with the representation of our society? People always say to me, well, I don't want quotas. You can have targets around this. And it's important to have targets because without targets, everything else we do in corporate America has a goal. You have a performance goal for the company. You have a deadline for a new product launch. You have eyeballs. I mean, we can go through all the things that people measure, but we don't measure this area. And we've got to do a better job in doing so. So the wheels, the machine will start to move again. And when it starts to move again, how intentional can we be about making sure that everyone gets a chance?
How can business leaders, peers, and consumers hold businesses accountable to making that kind of real change, even if it's years down the line when they're finally able to?
This is what I think about society today. And because of the viral nature of the internet, everyone's watching. Everyone has an opinion and they're willing to state it. And we've seen that time and time again. Look at the companies where they've had employee walkouts over issues. Look at the fact that when companies don't do the right thing, how fast those issues spread. They spread like wildfire. It's interesting to me. Bad news spreads so much faster than good news. And I think as a corporate leader, we just have to understand that and be on notice. There is no hiding. And if you say you're going to do something, you don't do it, your employees and your customers and our society is more likely to hold you accountable than ever before.
A lot of corporate leaders have made pledges to change their internal company practices and be more inclusive. What are some of the best ideas you've heard from other business leaders that you maybe hadn't thought of?
Well, I put the ones out there that I think are really important around the 3Ps, but I've heard lots of things that I think are great. I used to be on the board of Estee Lauder. They had reverse mentorships for their senior leadership. Their senior leaders were mentored by millennials, which I thought was super smart. Instead of it being a senior leader mentoring a young person, it was just the opposite. So they could have a perspective on the sense of that generation and what was important to them and how they see the world. I think that is brilliant. That's really, really smart. That shows you are being inclusive, that those voices matter and that you want to hear them.
What do you think some of the most common mistakes and potentially avoidable ones that you've seen in the business world in terms of diversity?
Well, first and foremost, it's stating things that you don't plan to come through on. And so I just don't believe in that. And I'm worried about that a bit right now because all of these statements have been put out and people feel like they have to do it, as opposed to, I'd rather you not talk and act. There's been a lot of talk and my statement has been talk is cheap. We need more elbow grease. We need more accountability. You get what you incent in corporate America. We need incentives around this. We have incentives around everything else. We don't keep our jobs if we fail. But in the area of diversity and inclusion, the common statement is we're working on it. It just doesn't work. As Yoda said, do or do not, there is no try. Trying in this area is not good enough. It reminds me of when I was a kid. And when I was a kid in math class, our teacher would give us partial credit if we showed our work, but we didn't get the right answer. Corporate America wants partial credit on this diversity work, but they're not getting the right answer. And that can't continue to work and be acceptable.
You've been a thought leader in the business community for over 2 decades. You obviously have a lot of opinions on how American business works. I'm sure you've seen a lot of pros and cons between the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement that's happening right now. Have the past few months shifted your way of thinking about American business in any major ways?
I think the one shift that I would make, it's not a shift. I guess it's just become clearer and clearer to me. I've believed this for a while. I've had the benefit of being on the board of Starbucks since 2006. And I got to learn from Howard Schultz, who is one of the most iconic business leaders of our generation. And obviously his success story, but just his point of view about business and the role and responsibilities of a corporation. We spent a lot of time talking about that at Starbucks, and it's something that really landed with me. And it's only, I think I would say, crested at this time for me. So I've believed it, but I believe more than ever before, corporate America has a much bigger responsibility than perhaps they want, but they'll have to accept it. They'll have to be up to the challenge because that's where we are as a society. And that's everything from corporations now doing, unfortunately, live shooter drills. I mean, who would have thought we would have had those things in corporate America, to some of having to be concerned about benefits plans that adequately cover mental illness. I mean, there are a whole host of issues now that are the problems of the corporation, because corporations are made up of people and they bring their whole selves to work. And it doesn't mean that we're supposed to be there for everything, but there are some big, broad issues in our society that government cannot address, and we have to be a part of the solution. And I learned that from Howard.
What gives you hope right now?
I'm naturally optimistic. And so even in the most trying of times, and I've been through some that are pretty hairy, particularly when I was young, and certainly we've seen some really hairy moments in the stock market that are, take your breath away at times. But I always believe that tomorrow will be better. I really am one of those people. And, this is the most trite answer you could possibly imagine, I'm sure. But I get hope from the idea that the sun will rise tomorrow. And another day gives me another opportunity, gives all of us another opportunity to do better and to solve what wasn't working or fix the ills of our society. And when you look at the progression of history, that has proven to be true. What we are today versus hundreds of years ago, the diseases that have been cured, the longevity of life, the people who have been pulled out of poverty, the sophistication of our systems, the advances that have been made from the wheel to the internet, all of that suggests progress. And I'm a believer that progress will continue.
Well, that is an inspiring note to leave on. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, Mellody.
Thank you for having me.